Hey everybody, alright, let's take some membrane notes. And let's start off by talking about the molecule that makes up most of our membranes inside of our bodies, and that is the phospholipid. We've talked a little bit about this in class. It has a head and two tails. If the tail has an unsaturated fatty acid, then the tail will be kinked off to the side there. If both tails are saturated, then they will both just kind of come straight down. So in this case, both tails are saturated. These are fatty acids at the bottom. Just a reminder that we made something similar to a fatty acid in class, where we had a molecule called glycerol. And from that glycerol, we are able to attach fatty acids. But there are 3 points that we can attach something to, and in the case of the phospholipid, the third attachment is connected to a phosphate group, which is what makes it a phospholipid. We don't worry about drawing the glycerol when we draw our model. We just kind of draw the phosphate head with the saturated fatty acid tails. We just tend to draw those two. Don't forget that the head has a charge to it. The head is charged, which makes the head polar. And because it is polar, it likes that other substance that is polar that is found all over the place in our bodies, and that is it's attracted to water. The tails, composed of mostly carbons and hydrogens, are nonpolar, which means non-charged. And because of that, they do not like those charged molecules that are full in our body, which is water. So we call that hydrophobic. There's an AKA that we can put down here, and that is that these fatty acid tails love other lipids, and so we might actually say that the tails are lipophilic, and the head might be lipophobic, but we just need to worry about the hydrophilic and hydrophobic aspects of this. Because this molecule contains both a hydrophilic and a hydrophobic part, this molecule is said to be an amphipathic molecule. Amphipathic. Kind of think about it like ambidextrous. Somebody's ambidextrous is able to use both their right and left hand to write. And in this case, amphipathic means that it is a single molecule. A single molecule with both a hydrophobic and a hydrophilic part. Okay. This is a phospholipid. And when you put a bunch of phospholipids together in some sort of solution, they naturally form themselves into a bilayer that is 2 different layers. And that is what makes up our membrane. So I'm going to draw just 10 of these, all kind of just going in the same direction. Make sure you give yours kind of squiggly tails. And when you draw them, you should draw the heads right next to each other. 8, 9, 10. Those heads should be right next to each other. I see some people, when they go to draw these, leaving giant gaps in between the heads, and that's not okay. The little gap that I drew right here, that's fine. But if you were to draw a head over here and leave this space right here, that's not okay. All right, let's erase those things right there. We don't need those. Oh no, I lost some heads. Okay. There's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oops, I need to be drawing these tails up here a lot closer. They should be meeting right here in the middle. Okay. There we go. Okay. So this is a good example of a phospholipid bilayer. In this phospholipid bilayer, we have this big hydrophobic area that is made up of all of those tails for the phospholipids. And we have a hydrophilic area right here. We have a hydrophobic area right here. So when you think about a part of your cell, let's say like a lysosome, and we have all these enzymes in here, and we have some acidic conditions in here. When we're thinking about this membrane right here, this little part that right there, this is what it's representing. So that one single line that I drew right in there is actually 2 layers of lipids here and here. And even if we were to talk about our cell membrane, it's the same deal. These phospholipids can move all throughout the membrane. They don't just stay in one place. So phospholipids can move throughout the membrane. That's 2 different words. And it is weak interactions between the tails that keeps all of these things attached to each other. Weak interactions, and think about interactions as some sort of attractions. Weak interactions between the tails keeps the membrane together. And because they're weak, that's why it's very fluid as well. That's why things are able to move around and bustle and jostle around all over the place. But it's not just phospholipids that are in the membrane. There are a couple of parts that are in there. And this particular model of the membrane is the best for what we know right now. And this model is called the fluid mosaic model. It's called fluid because things can move around in the membrane, and it's called mosaic because it appears to be made of lots of individual little different kinds of pieces. So this is what your drawing quiz is going to be. You need to be able to draw a little section of a fluid mosaic model of the cell membrane. So to start out, let's just draw 5 or 6 phospholipids here. It's not the number that's important, but it's where you put them that's important. And like I just said a little earlier, get these heads close. These tails should also be really close to each other. All right, so here's a little phospholipid portion of our membrane. Now, the membrane also has lots of different kinds of proteins inside of it. I should have drawn that a different color for you. Lots of different kinds of proteins on the inside of it. All right? So, this is what we call an integral protein. Integral protein, which means that it spans the membrane. It goes from one side of the membrane to another side of the membrane. Now, integral proteins can have all kinds of different functions. Integral proteins can serve as a site of recognition. They can serve as a site of recognition so that one cell can recognize this cell as belonging to a certain type of cell or to a certain individual. These proteins can be receptors. And by receptors, once again, we mean that they can have a little part on them that something fits into. All right. These proteins can act as enzymes. They can act as transporters. And those are all of the different things that integral proteins can do. Okay, so let's draw a couple more phospholipids here. 1, 2, 3, I'll do 4 more. Now yours, once again, it's not about the number, it's about putting the right kinds and numbers of things in here. Now interspersed in here, in this membrane, we also need to have little cholesterols. So cholesterols we will draw with a tiny little head. And then I'm going to draw just big zigzags for their tails. Big zigzags for their tails. And these should just kind of be interspersed in there. They need to be facing the inside of the cell, and they need to be facing the outside of the cell. But think about the pictures that we saw in class. These tails represent different kinds of hexagons and pentagons, but they're all carbon and hydrogen. And you know what, for fun, let's toss another one over here. All right, so we've got all kinds of cholesterols here. And remember that these cholesterols help to decrease the fluidity of the membrane, because these cholesterols are attracted to many surrounding phospholipids. All right, let's throw another protein in here. There are other proteins that are not found throughout the membrane, but they sit on just one surface of the protein. You might hear these referred to as surface proteins or peripheral proteins, kind of like how your peripheral vision is on the like the outside of your vision. These peripheral proteins can also act as enzymes, where a substrate comes up. Let me get the pointer on there, where a substrate comes up here, and once it fits into the active site, some reaction happens, and then the products come out. These proteins can sometimes act as an anchor for something inside of the cell, like a part of the skeleton of the cell. Or maybe they need to, this protein will attach to another protein on another cell and hold the cells together. And sometimes these can act as transports or carriers. These can act as transports or carriers. On this page will be a pretty good picture that kind of outlines these 5 different or 6 different things, and yeah, that should help you out in understanding them. So the only thing we didn't do is add a little bit of labels here. We can label an hydrophilic head. Label the hydrophilic head on the phospholipid. We can label the hydrophobic tail on the phospholipid. And we can label that these together make a phospholipid molecule. On the drawing quiz, you're just going to have to draw the fluid mosaic model of a membrane and be able to add in integral and peripheral proteins and cholesterols. Think about all the things I said as I was drawing this. The heads should be touching each other. The tails should be almost coming up to each other. An integral protein has to go all the way across the membrane, and a peripheral protein needs to just be on one side of the membrane. It doesn't have to be on one side or the other. On the quiz, I'll tell you about how many of each you should do, and you get to choose the arrangement of them. You should know some vocab words like amphipathic. You should understand, the functions of the different things, the integral, peripheral proteins, and the cholesterols. And that's about it. We're going to learn about 3 systems of the body. And these systems of the body completely rely on understanding how stuff crosses this membrane. And those systems of the body are our digestive system, because not only do we digest foods, but we also absorb those nutrients into our body. And because those nutrients need to pass through the membrane, OM gosh, it has to do with the cell membrane. We're going to learn about our gas exchange system, which is in our lungs, because oxygen and carbon dioxide need to move between our blood and our surrounding environment. And we are going to learn about neurons in the nervous system, because the signal that passes down our neurons totally relies on things crossing the membrane, and how we send signals from one membrane of a neuron to another has to rely on this as well. Okay, that's it for the night. Kish out.